Hi, this is Dr. Kimberley Linert, author of Visualizing Happiness in Every Area of Your Life and host of this podcast, Incredible Life Creator. And today I have with me Jamie Smart. Hey, Jamie.
Hey, Kimberly, great to see you.
Yeah, nice to see you all the way from UK. So it's later there and earlier here.
Yeah.
So just so people can know you, I'm going to go ahead and read your bio. So
Okay.
Jamie Smart is a Sunday Times best-selling author, speaker, and coach. He's passionate about showing individuals and organizations the principles behind clarity. And we all need and want clarity in our lives, for sure.
Yeah.
So I know you have a story where you did several pivots throughout your life. So if you
Yeah.
could just tell us about you.
Yeah, sure. Well, so I grew up on the west coast of Canada, which is where I got this accent. And then I moved to the UK when I was 20, and basically got into the world of work, working with computers in the world of publishing and that sort of thing. And over the course of time, I got into doing project management and program management for large organizational change programs. And at the time, I was a chronic alcoholic, but I was quite good at my job. And then in 1997, I had to stop drinking, which I did. I started getting sober, and all of a sudden, the work that I could do drunk, I couldn't do sober. It's like I knew there was something more for me in life. So I was in my early 30s, and the story I was telling myself at the time was, if I knew what I wanted to do, I would do it, but I didn't know what it was. So I was like, oh, well, once I figure it out, I'll do it. And so I'm working as a project manager. Anyway, I got fascinated with a thing called neurolinguistic programming, which I think you're a trainer of. And so I went on a course to improve my influence skills at work, because in the project management game, it was always, it's not a technology problem, it's a people problem. And so it's winning hearts and minds and all that sort of stuff. So I go on this weekend training course. And over the course of that weekend, I had two insights. Now, I didn't know that they were insights. I just had these two aha moments. And the first one was, uh, like, up until that point, Kimberly, the way I'd related to life was sort of like it was happening to me, like I was on a predestined track that, I just had to do what was expected of me. And I did I started studying engineering because that's what I thought I was supposed to do, all that kind of stuff. And it felt kind of like being a pinball in a pinball machine. I was just like doing the next thing. And what I suddenly realized was, oh, you're a creative force in your life. You've played a role in creating the life you have today. And if you've played a role in creating the life you have today, you can create it differently. You can do whatever you want. You can at least put your mind to it and see what happens. So suddenly I felt this incredible kind of a mixed sense of both responsibility, like, oh, I was responsible for it all along, which was kind of liberating, and then this sense of freedom. So that was the first insight, which was, whoa, where did that come from? Second insight. So I go on this course, which was like called NLP for, I don't know, business success or something. I'm on this course with 100 people, and the trainer is up at the front of the room telling stories, coaching people, doing demonstrations, that sort of thing. And it was the most interesting 2-day training course I'd ever been on. Every other training course I'd ever been on was like a practical approach to data management and things like that. It was very, very dull. So I'm watching this trainer and I'm like, I want to do that. I want to do that. So I quit my job a couple of weeks later and became a contractor, because I was like, oh, you're going to need to fund retraining, basically. And basically threw myself into learning about the mind, about communications, about language, about all this stuff. So I trained as a NLP trainer and grew a company. It was, I did a couple of companies. At first I had a company with a business partner, and we were doing organizational consulting and sales training and team building and that sort of thing. But what I really wanted, like, I'd been touched with that sense of freedom and liberation. What I really wanted was to show individuals what they're capable of and what's possible for us, because I wanted other people to have that same sense of kind of realization and liberation that I'd had, right? So in 2003, I launched a company called Salad, which was basically NLP training, linguistic stuff, that sort of stuff. Grew that business. It was the early days of Google AdWords. And so I quickly grew an audience of about 90,000 people. I had a big audience selling products, that sort of thing, loving my work. But here's where it gets funny. So in 2007, I read a book by Tim Ferriss called The 4-Hour Work Week, because something wasn't quite right. And I was like, oh, that's where I've been going wrong. I need to get my business running on autopilot and go around the world and have mini retirements and adventures and that sort of thing. So I worked with my team, got my business running on, sort of autopilot. So I needed to work a few hours a week. I went for my first mini retirement, which was a 3-month ski holiday in Whistler in Canada. And as far as I was concerned, Kimberley, this was going to be brilliant, because I would get way better at skiing. I would be happy and fulfilled and joyful and feeling, according to the rules of my industry, I would be feeling so successful that there would be white light pouring out of me. So I couldn't wait. I got there, and within 6 weeks, I was miserable, bored, had sore feet, feeling unfulfilled, off track. And I'm like, what's gone wrong? Because according to my game plan for life, this should have been nirvana, and instead it wasn't. So I had to go back to the drawing board. And in the process of going back to the drawing board, I stumbled across what I could still consider to be psychology's best kept secret. And I was working with a coach, and I'll tell you the story actually. So he said, well, let's make a list of your goals, which I did. So I had all these, kind of stretch goals, like go powder skiing in Kathmandu and, make $10 million and all this sort of stuff. He said, and what I want you to do is any of those goals that's predicated on the idea that you'll be happier once you've got that, just put a line through it. Well, I put a line through all of them, because they were all based on the idea of I'll be happy when I get the car or the girlfriend or the this or the that sort of thing. And he's like, that's not how it works. Happiness works from the inside out. It's an inside job. Now, I knew that conceptually, I'd heard that a lot, but the way it was kind of baked into my system was based on I'll be happy when. And so I started having insights into this understanding. And the first insight I had, Kimberley, was like, oh, everything you've been looking for outside of you is already there within you. Now, obviously not cool shoes and wristwatches and holidays, but the feelings of fulfillment and well-being and security and love and peace and joy, they're all within you. And again, this is something I'd known intellectually, but that's kind of a way of saying I didn't really know it, because how I was operating was looking for it outside of myself. So that was a big insight. This is early 2009. First insight, everything you've been looking for outside of you, you already have it. It's already there within you. Second insight was a few weeks later. I realized, oh, the fact that a person can see or hear or feel or sense or perceive means they have the source of happiness, resilience, realization, mental health, transformation already there within them. Well, it made me so much more hopeful in my work with clients, because all of a sudden I'd sit down with a coaching client, and regardless of what they said, I could see that they had innate resilience and well-being right there, just under the surface. And then my third insight into this stuff was in June 2009. I was at a mastermind group in Los Angeles, and we'd had some sessions, and I'd been listening to some recordings by a guy called Sydney Banks, who's the guy who first had realizations into kind of the inside out nature of life. Listening to a recording by him, I woke up the next morning, I'm like, oh, this is principles for psychology. this is to psychology what the discovery of germs was to medicine. And the moment I realized that, I got a vision of it. Just like you and me, Kimberly, we grew up in a world where the adults already knew about bacteria. They already knew that, you need to sterilize medical instruments and, observe the 3-second rule if you drop a sandwich, and wash your hands before dinner and all that sort of stuff. Well, our great-great-grandparents, they didn't know anything about that because germs were invisible. Like germs, the link between germs and disease was unknown. So I suddenly realized, oh, this is to psychology what the discovery of germs was to medicine. And I had a vision of the first generation of children growing up to parents who already know that they have innate mental health and well-being. And so literally that day I called up my office. I said, we're changing direction. There's principles for psychology. So that's where kind of the things really got interesting. So within a couple of years, I wrote my my first book, Clarity. That's actually the second edition of it, but that became a big bestseller. Then I wrote Results, which became a Sunday Times bestseller. And my passion is taking this understanding to individuals, to organizations. I love working with coaches and trainers and therapists and change workers, just showing them the innate capacity for resilience and realization and transformation that everyone has, because once you see it for yourself, you can see it in everyone else, and it's wonderful. So that kind of brings us up to where I am now. That I started sharing that understanding in 2009. I'm still passionate about it. That's what I love doing, and it's a joy working with people around that.
Yeah. And I love what you just said about, everything is within us. And, when I look at a person, so I'm in the healthcare space as a behavioral optometrist, so working in a therapy center. And I'm one of those people that just always can see the potential. I don't care where they're starting from, whether they've had a head injury or
Mm.
autistic child or, a CEO of a company, doesn't matter. Everybody has their place where they start. And I think one of my superpowers has been I just see the potential. I see
Yeah.
where they're at, but I see the potential. And because I believe in that potential, I can get them, I can get them there.
Well, that makes total sense to me. There's something, speaking to you as a change worker, as a people helper, as a healer, there's something about you having eyes for what the other person has going for them that the other person picks up on. They pick up on it. And it's, to me anyway, Kimberly, what I hear in what you're saying is it's not just that you think they have potential, you can see what's already there. So
Right.
it's not a positive, it's not positive thinking. It's like recognizing what's already true.
Exactly. And, the other thing I'm thinking of is sometimes we need other people to have faith in us until we can have the faith in us. We need other people who can see that potential or can see what's inside of us and have that belief until we can actually develop that faith or that belief in ourselves.
Yeah, I totally agree. Like, it's funny. One of my mentors once said, her kind of secret recipe for success was belief plus action equals success. She said, but it doesn't have to be self-belief. You can have someone else believe in you. And I think what you're saying, or what I'm pointing to, is sort of uh, a level beyond that, which is knowing. Once you know what someone's got going for them, it doesn't even matter if they believe. They'll pick up on your knowing.
Yeah. And it's so funny because a lot of times, and I was just talking to someone actually another podcast, and he works with CEOs, and he said the biggest problem with communication is CEOs feel isolated. They feel isolated because they feel like they can't communicate with people because they don't feel like they actually are up to the job. They don't feel confident within themselves, even though you'd think, well, they've been up, they went up in the company, they were chosen, CEO is the top guy. They were
Yeah.
chosen as that top guy, yet they're still dealing with self-doubt and not feeling like they're good enough or they can do the job.
Yeah, and it's I think in a way, Kimberly, it's because for so many people, well, it's funny, I don't know if this will intersect or not, but I was working with a guy once, and he was a former McKinsey consultant. And McKinsey at the time, according to him, had a hiring policy, which is they would hire overachievers with low self-esteem, because they found that overachievers with low self-esteem would go to the ends of the earth to prove that they were good enough. And then they would eventually burn out, but then they'd replace them with the next set. Well, if someone is looking to the world of achievement or accomplishment or acquisition or climbing the ladder or whatever, it's funny, there's a piece of research was done ages ago looking at the fates of Olympic gold medal winners. So Olympic gold medal winners, these are the people who have reached the pinnacle of achievement in their field. But what they found was that Olympic gold medal winners, after they'd won the gold, they actually fell into two very different camps. The first camp would go on to start successful businesses or to coach other athletes or to found charities or do, work all around the world. Like they would have very successful, fulfilling, happy, positive lives, right? That's about 50% of them. The other 50% would sink into depression, drug addiction, divorce, all like a whole smorgasbord of the worst things that could happen. And what they found was the fundamental difference between those two groups is the ones who fell into drug addiction, depression, mental illness, all that sort of thing, they'd been running an I'll be happy when pattern. They'd be going, once I get to captain of the varsity team, then I'll feel fulfilled. And then they got there. It's like, oh, that didn't work. Okay, once I become county champion, then I'll feel happy. Nope, that didn't work. Okay, once I become country champion, then I'll feel happy. No, that didn't work. Okay, I'll get to the Olympics. That'll work. But once they get the gold in the Olympics, there's no more road after that. And so that I'll be happy when, well, I see that a lot when I'm coaching CEOs and entrepreneurs. So entrepreneurs will go, oh, once I get my exit deal, then I'll be happy. But it doesn't work. The CEO goes, once I hit my bonus targets, or once I get made chairman or whatever. Again, it doesn't work because people are looking outside themselves for something that can only come from within. And then people often go, oh, yeah, but if I wasn't looking outside myself, I wouldn't be motivated. But that turns out not to be true. When you're intrinsically motivated, it's actually more reliable and sustainable.
Yeah, and you have control over it, which it's got to give you confidence when you know you're in control of how you feel, what you get, how your life's going to be.
Well, I don't know. I don't know how in control of it I am. Like I love the fact that my mind's a self-correcting system, but I can't, for instance, go, okay, I'm going to wake up tomorrow morning and I'm going to feel tickled pink. I haven't found that I've got that much control. But what I have found is that understanding the self-correcting nature of the mind and being able to notice when I'm off base. Like, it's funny, Kimberly, I used to think that if I felt angry, it was a sign that I was around someone who was making me angry. I thought I was a very good idiot detector. So if I was feeling angry or frustrated, I could point at the reasons for it typically. And I thought I was good at that and that I was very smart at identifying people who are being idiots and that sort of thing. But it turns out that the feeling of anger, annoyance, irritation is letting me know about something that's going on in my nervous system, not about what I'm around. A friend of mine, Sandy, says, your engine warning light in your car, that's letting you know about your engine, not about everyone else's engine. And it's the same with anger and frustration. So what I've found is just understanding that for instance, when I'm feeling frustrated or that sort of thing, it's kind of like I'm hitting the rumble strips at the edge of the road. That's letting me know, oh, not that way. And so I can ease off it. And the system is self-correcting. So what I've found anyway is that letting that self-correct, understanding that it's a self-correcting system and letting it do what it's designed to do is even more powerful than trying to control it. It's sort of like oh, I wonder if I've got one handy. I sometimes have a snow globe somewhere. Let me see. Ah, yeah, here we go. So like this is how I think of the mind. It's like a snow globe. There's nothing you can really do to clear the liquid, but if you just let it settle down, the liquid will clear because clarity is the liquid's natural state. Well, my assertion is that clarity is your mind's natural state. You know, I've asked literally thousands of people, Kimberly, when do you get your best ideas? And the answers are always the same. When I'm out for a walk, when I'm in the shower, when I'm just about to drop off to bed at night, to sleep at night, when I first wake up in the morning, when I'm driving to and from work, when I'm out in nature. So what we find is that there's an innate capacity of the mind to come up with insight and fresh, useful, valuable thinking. But it's not something we can control so much. It's something when we ease off trying to direct it and control it, that it emerges spontaneously. That's what I've found with it anyway.
Well, that makes sense too. And the other factor, not necessarily the mind that I thought of that sparked this kind of memories is I know women have this, and sometimes our hormones are changing in our bodies. And I remember years ago, I picked up the phone and I said hello, and my friend said, "Oh, you started your cycle today, didn't you?" Because my voice would even change, that whole mental thing would change with the physiological change in my body. So there is a lot, like you said, that we don't really have control over, but we can control how we choose to act even when that's happening.
Yeah, thank goodness. Thank goodness that we can. And I think, I think that whole domain of the different hormones, the different neurotransmitters, all the different things that are going on. What I see, Kimberly, is that there's a much bigger wisdom and intelligence at play. Like, because we're part of this natural world. We're part of the wisdom and intelligence of life. And so everything from a woman's cycles to the different seasons of life that we go through and all that sort of stuff, there's a deep wisdom and intelligence in it. So a big part of certainly of my work is kind of helping people to tune into, as well as it can be ever so valuable for us to get in touch with what we really want, what our heart's desires, what really matters to us. And then there's a kind of a counterbalance to it, which is I find it also really, really valuable to find out, what does life want from me? What does life want for me? What's that deeper wisdom and intelligence guiding me to? Because I don't know if you've found this, Kimberly, but it's funny, like the work that I could do when I was drinking, it was kind of relying on me to dull out that deeper intelligence so I could keep doing that stuff, so I could, get paid and all that sort of stuff. As soon as I stopped drinking, it's like the wisdom in the system is suddenly sparking up and available to kind of guide and direct and all. Like, I wouldn't even be having this conversation with you today if it wasn't for insights I had 25 years ago and that sort of thing. It's amazing to me how rich that pattern is, that deeper connection that we all have.
And I actually was curious about that because it surprised me when you said that. You said, "Well, I stopped drinking and then I could no longer do the job." And I thought it would be the opposite. So is it
Oh,
saw that it was like something that you really didn't like doing, or that what changed that you couldn't do the job?
Well, here's how it looks to me, but it didn't look to me at the time like this. But here's how it looks to me now. Like the work I was doing as a project manager, we would basically get a budget of like, I don't know, $10 million or something like that, a bunch of people, and a timetable, be like, okay, you need to build all this stuff and implement it, and you've got 12 months to do it. And it was super stressful. And one of my gifts, quote unquote, was I could be really, really worried and spot risks coming and that sort of thing. But to operate under that level of stress and worry, the way I experienced the world at the time, I needed medication. And my favorite medication was pints of beer and gin and tonics. So as I see it now, alcohol was medication for a thinking problem, for a thinking and emotional problem. And when I stopped drinking, I was off my meds. And the work I could do medicated, I couldn't do unmedicated, because there was a wisdom and intelligence, a longing in me for things that weren't even things that would have sounded like hippie nonsense to me when I was drinking, like things like freedom, things like authenticity, things like ease, things like love and connection, things like contribution. Like those are things which suddenly, once I'd stopped drinking, before long, those kind of lit up in me. They kind of came to life, and I had to follow them. So and it's so interesting, Kimberly. If I look back at my website from 2003, the stuff that I wrote on it, it's not so different from what I've written in my books more recently. It's just it was like an earlier incarnation of that thing. So there's always been something in me that's been longing for freedom, authenticity, truth, expansion, potential, all that sort of stuff. Mm-hmm. But alcohol kind of kept a lid on that and allowed me just to kind of color within the lines and all that sort of stuff. So that's how it looks to me anyway.
Got it. And then the other thing I noticed is that, you have a realization, you make a decision, and you just like close the door. I mean, 2 weeks, you quit, you move
Yeah.
on. And so many, especially entrepreneurs or anybody trying something new, sometimes it takes us a while to transition. Like we don't just jump from, okay, I've got income, and now 2 weeks later I have no income and I'm starting this new thing. What I don't even know what is the secret sauce to that? Is it just your
Well,
personality or
let me tell you the slightly longer version. So I was working as a consultant at the time. So I was doing project management as a consultant. I go on this weekend course and I have this insight. I want to do that. I want to be a trainer. I want to coach. I was fascinated with this whole domain. I was like, okay, that's what I wanted. And I'd been telling myself for years, if only I knew what I wanted to do, I would do it. And it was almost like a promise I'd made to myself. It's like, if I ever figure out what I want to do, I'm going to do it. So now I'm like, oh, I know what I want to do. And so I just sat down and said, okay, what's that going to involve? It's like, it's probably going to take me a couple of years to get any good at it. Also, I've never run my own business before, so I'm going to have to figure all that out. Okay, what are the options? One option was just to quit and have a go at it, but I didn't have the financial reserves to back that up. Another option was to stay in my job and, go on training courses on the weekends and that sort of thing. And I thought, well, actually, at the time in London where I was living, contract project managers were getting paid like £1,000 a day, which is at the time was a lot of money. It's still a lot of money. So I was like, I could become a contractor. I could earn 3 times what I'm earning now. I could work, fewer days a week, and I would have the time and the income to go and retrain and that sort of thing. Now, here's the funny thing, Kimberly. For the 5 years prior to that, I'd had lots of friends who had become contractors and started their own businesses and that sort of thing. And they'd said to me, why don't you do it? You could do it. You're good at what you do. Da, da. But I knew that I couldn't. There was something different about me as far as I was concerned. Like, I'd never really looked at beliefs or the mind or anything. I was like, I could understand why they could do it because they were the kind of people who could do it. But my case was different. I kind of had, I don't know, employee. Like, I remember, I'll never forget when I was in my 20s, I knew a guy who was a multimillionaire property developer. And my money mindset was so impoverished that the most leveraged idea I had in the time I knew him was maybe one day he'd give me a chunk of money. Like, there was no sense of I could learn what he's figured out and apply it myself. Because as far as I was concerned, I was a person who didn't have money, who I didn't have money DNA. And that's, well, in that, since then, I never forget it. I was on a training course in 1998 or 1999. And I was chatting with this guy he seemed quite wealthy, another consultant, that sort of thing. And I said, so how did you become wealthy? He said, well, as I'm sure you know, Jamie, he said, money is 98% psychology, 2% tactics. And I was like, what? He said, money is 98% psychology, 2% tactics. I'm like, I have never heard anything like that before. Tell me more. So, like, it was like, I had just never even looked at it. I didn't think there was any point even reading a book about it because I'm this guy who didn't have money. When I learned that, I was like, are you kidding me? So total game changer. So it was the same with leaving my job. I didn't hand in my notice till I lined up because all of a sudden, once I realized that I'd been creating the life I had, it wasn't just happening to me. While I thought it was happening to me, it was happening to me with my job. It was happening to me with my money. As soon as I realized, no, this isn't happening to you. You've been creating this, even if you didn't realize. I was like, well, and I can create it differently. And I'm going to become a contractor like all my friends told me I could for all those years, and I didn't believe them. I'll go do that, and I'll make triple the money. I'll have the time and money and freedom to go and retrain and start my own business. Bob's your uncle. So it was 2 weeks later that I quit my job. It was a very busy 2 weeks figuring stuff out and lining things up and that sort of thing. But it was a game changer. I'll never forget. I was talking to my buddy maybe 6 months or 10 months later. And it had been a hard year. These projects I was managing were difficult and challenging, and there were various things going on. And he said, oh, how's it going? And I said, oh man, it's been a tricky year. It's quite a few challenges. He said, oh, are you regretting handing in your notice? I'm like, oh God, no. Best thing I ever did. It was just such Kimberly, when I went into my then boss's office and handed in my notice and he accepted my resignation and I walked out, it was like a weight had been lifted from my shoulders, a weight that I hadn't even known was there, right? And it had been lifted from my shoulders. I felt such freedom. And it didn't occur to me at the time that weight that I didn't even know was there was made entirely of my own psychology. Didn't realize that I'd been carrying around a mind-made weight all those years and then having to drink to kind of relieve the pressure of it. But yeah, total game changer. So it's funny, when I tell the story, it sounds like it would take courage or something like that, but it just seemed obvious. It didn't really take any courage. It was just like, oh, but this is what sometimes happens. There's a wonderful quote there's a commencement talk that Steve Jobs gave, I think, to students graduating from Stanford many, 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 many years ago. And at the end of it, he says, above all, have the courage to follow your heart and your intuition. They somehow already know what you truly want to become. Everything else is secondary. I believe that. And to this day, my biggest challenge still is sometimes not having the courage to follow that, wanting the perfect plan or the guarantee of how it'll turn out and that sort of thing. But ultimately, if you're willing to follow your courage, have the courage to follow your heart and your intuition, the path gets revealed and we find the way, is how it seems to me.
Yeah. So you talked about, that money mindset you had, and there's a lot of people that have that set mindset. Either they are employees or they come from family or influence where there was a lot of lack or impoverishment, or, uh security is like super important, above following your dreams, if you will. So if someone wanted to start with something like, okay, now they know that it's 98% psychology, where could they start to
Well,
change?
there are a few things that I think are certainly were really valuable to me in my journey. The first one was I read a book. I know everyone's read this one, but there's a book by Robert Kiyosaki called Rich Dad, Poor Dad. And I read that book and another book by him called The Cash Flow Quadrant. Part of the issue for me was I didn't understand money at all, had no understanding of money, of business, of how money works. So the first thing I'd suggest is maybe grab those books. There's a wonderful book by a woman called Lynn Twist, who was the chief fundraiser for the Hunger Project for many, many years. She wrote a book called The Soul of Money, which is absolutely wonderful. I love it. But here's the interesting thing. I have a friend she's always struggling with money. And I gave her some recordings to listen to that I've got about money. In fact, if people want to listen to my money stuff, they can just send me an email to info@jamiesmart.com and just say, please send me the money recordings and I'll get my team to send it out. But here's the challenge she has, and this is a challenge I had. I've given her materials to listen to, I've given her books and that sort of thing. But when she goes to read them, it feels so boring. It's like because as human beings, we like what's familiar, and oftentimes our money stories, our money conditioning that we've grown up with from family or whatever is so embodied that even the idea of looking in a direction that might help, we kind of go, oh, yeah, I must do that sometime, but it gets put in the boring or tedious or difficult category. So I think one of the most valuable things, I remember someone put it beautifully to me. They said, do you have a pet? And at the time, my girlfriend had a dog. And I said, well, yeah, we got a dog. And what does that dog do when you come home? It's like, oh, the dog jumps up, tail wagging, happy to see me, all that sort of thing. He said, now, what would happen if every time you saw the dog, you felt bad and you shouted at it and that sort of thing? So, well, pretty soon it'd just stay away. And they said, well, money's exactly the same. Money's like a pet dog. If you have fun with it, if you play with it, if you learn about it, if you have a good feeling around it, it'll want to come to you more. Whereas if you feel bad about it, if you feel uncomfortable about it, that sort of thing, it'll stay away. So I think one of the most valuable things people can do is just make the decision to learn about it. Like if you learn about money, and these days there's so many books and podcasts and YouTube videos, all sorts of things. Like there's so much amazing information out there. Just decide, you know what, I'm going to learn about it, because I promise the more someone learns about just how money works and that sort of thing, that'll do something for you. And then if you can just cultivate a good feeling in relation to money. Now, here's the other thing, Kimberly. Our feelings around money, they hide, because in our society, if someone says to you, hey, would you like a brown paper bag with $100,000 in it? It's pretty normal. Like, me too. Like, it's pretty normal to go, yeah, sure, I'd be happy with that. And so you can't necessarily look right at money to know how you feel about money. You need to look at the periphery of money. So the periphery of money might be bank statements, bills, a meeting with your accountant, or your a financial planner, that sort of thing, a conversation with the bank, doing your accounts, balancing your checkbook if people still do that. I don't, but so you want to look at the periphery of money, because however your feelings are around that, that'll tell you how you feel about money. So that's worth doing. I guess if there was one other thing on the money front, I think that's probably good to start with, actually. I think that's but the other, no, there is one other thing. Money is a technology, and it's a technology that has been around for so long that it's kind of become invisible and melted into our world, and we treat it as though it's part of nature, as though it's part of life. But it isn't. It's a tool. It's a technology, right? And it's a very, that our understanding of money is kind of baked into us as kids and at school and all that sort of thing. Most of us learned about money either from our parents or from teachers who were getting teachers' salaries. We get our beliefs about it, or from newspapers and magazines written by people who are earning 40 grand a year. So we're not learning about money from people who know about money, right? And so it's never been easier to upgrade your wisdom group when it comes to money. But the biggest thing you can do is to just decide we're willing for it to be different, because as human beings, we like what's familiar, but we learn from what's new. And it may feel a little uncomfortable at times, but the thing I always say to my friend is, you can just decide you're ready for it to be different. If you're ready for it to be different, and you just do the uncomfortable stuff, and pretty soon it becomes comfortable, and you'll be amazed. I have another friend who she had been pretty impoverished for most of her life, and she got an inheritance for £30,000, which to her was more money she'd ever dreamt she would have in her bank account. And she said to me, she goes, you know what? I'm going to invest this wisely. I'm not going to blow it. This could change my life. A year later, she'd been on some cool holidays, had some really nice boots, and not a penny of it left. And the way that her nervous system had responded to that money was like Superman responds to kryptonite. It was like she had an allergy to it. And so for the people you described if you've grown up in poverty, or you've been had role models who just haven't given you that enlightened view of money, just recognize that probably almost everything you know about money is wrong. And there's something you can learn about it, and a way that you can feel about it, that if you get that handled, you can be living in a different world financially, as crazy and impossible as that may sound. Like, I know it may sound like easy for you to say, Mr. Baldman, you probably got cash, but it starts with making a decision that you're ready for it to be different.
That's key. That's important. So you have a couple of books out. Well, one on second edition, Clarity and Results.
Yeah.
Everyone wants all of that. We want clarity and results. So, just talk about what you mean by clarity and results.
Let's start with clarity. The principles that I was talking about, the inside-out nature of the mind, what I refer to as the principles behind clarity, that's another way of talking about the fact that every single human being has an innate capacity for resilience, for well-being, for love, for peace, for connection, for joy, for fulfillment, for confidence, for well-being. These are innate capacities. And, happiness is so simple, a baby can do it. That's how innate it is. So it's funny, Kimberly, we're in a world where lots of people are writing books about how to be happy or how to be confident or all those things, but actually these are innate qualities. And so the question becomes, what's been getting in the way of it? So I'd say, just like clarity, that it's the same with confidence, with love, with peace, with joy. It's all already there. The question is, what's been getting in the way? And my assertion is that the only thing that ever gets in the way is what I refer to as contaminated thinking, which is thinking that's being generated by the mistaken belief that we're separate from life, that we're not part of this incredible totality, this incredible whole, WHOLE. So clarity is about that. And it's in the second edition, it was really, really nice actually, because in the first edition, I did case studies with various clients and people. In the second edition, I was able to do follow-ups with them 10 years later. And it was real. So there's a new chapter 25, called Troubleshooting Enlightenment, that includes case studies and sections on people who had things like PTSD, social anxiety, relationship challenges, all that sort of stuff. It's got the 10-year follow-ups in there. So that was really cool. The other thing I've added in the second edition is at the end of each chapter, I've put in a what the research says section. So we've got peer-reviewed research and other things just to back up the points that are in the book, because what's a little different about clarity, my assertion in the book, is that there's nothing for you to do or practice or memorize to experience more clarity. It's the way the book works is, well, that insight I told you about, the realization, oh, I want to do that. Well, that's a function of your mind's innate capacity for insights, for realizations, for ahas. And everyone's had them. That question I ask people, when do you get your best ideas? And they say, in nature, the woods, or out walking, or by the river, or whatever. In the shower. The top three are in the shower, on holiday, and driving to and from work. Well, the nature of those ideas is they arrive as insights. So my assertion is you and me and everyone else on the planet has an innate capacity for insight, an innate capacity for fresh perceptual reality, fresh new realizations that can transform your life. And in fact, in my case, that's the only thing that ever does, is a fresh new realization that gives you a new glimpse of yourself and the world. So the purpose of both books actually is to leverage the reader's innate capacity for insight and realization to transform their lives. And so it's one of the things I loved about writing these books is I continue to get, I'll tell you a story. I got an email from a young woman who was a US Army veteran, and she'd been diagnosed with PTSD. She'd been in the Gulf War, diagnosed with PTSD. And for 10 years, she'd been going to therapy, been to psychotherapists, psychiatrists, been on drugs, been on all kinds of things. And she wrote to me, she said, she told me this story. She said, in all that time, no one ever told me there's nothing wrong with you. You're not broken. You don't need fixing. She said, I read your book. I realized there's nothing wrong with me, and now I don't have PTSD anymore. So I'm still in touch with her. That was 8 or 9 years ago. Still in touch with her, and she's got her own business now. Life is great. It's all good. She still has ups and downs like everyone else, right? But once you realize what you've got going for you, the innate health and well-being and capacity that you have at the heart of your being, it's a game changer. So the whole purpose of both books is to wake people up to the fact of that. So Clarity is a very broad book, kind of a business-friendly personal development book about that. And then Results is taking that understanding and applying it more to the world of business and entrepreneurialism. Try saying that 3 times fast. So it's very much about, okay, now that you understand the inside out nature of your mind and how it works, how can you apply that in the world to get the results that matter to you? So that was the idea behind Results.
Wonderful. So if people wanted to connect with you, where do they find you, and what services, what are you doing now?
So if they want to track me down, the easiest place is my website, which is jamiesmart.com. I'm also in all the usual social media places, Facebook, LinkedIn, sometimes on Twitter and that sort of thing. YouTube, I've got lots of videos up on YouTube. What I'm doing these days is a mix of things. I work with selected organizations and companies to help work with their leadership teams and that sort of thing. And then most of my time these days is spent teaching coaches, therapists, change workers, retreat leaders, people helpers, how to bring this understanding into their work with others. Because what you see, Kimberly, is when a coach or a therapist or a change worker catches a glimpse of the innate capacity for realization and well-being that their clients have within them, their impact goes through the roof. So that's what I love doing. My mission is to awaken people and support them in awakening others. So I love awakening anyone who's interested in this understanding to the truth of who they are and what they got going for them. And I love supporting people who are helping other people to do that.
Wonderful. So now I have a personal question for you. What gives you the most happiness and fulfillment in your life at this point?
Well, I love that question. And I'll give you two answers. One's a technical answer, and the technical is kind of interesting. So I am very, very lucky to have met the love of my life some years ago. And I love her with all my heart. And many, many times I just get hit with a feeling of joy and gratitude for life. Now, here's the funny thing, Kimberly. Technically, I know that's because in those moments, I'm awake to the truth of my nature. I'm awake. So it comes from within. But as far as I'm concerned, there's nothing I like better than spending time with my girlfriend, spending time with my daughters. I love martial arts and learning. So I'm learning Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu at the moment. I love teaching. I love working with groups. I love, one of my favorite things is I love doing coaching demonstrations. So practicums and teaching people how to do this work with others. So I love that, love teaching, love drinking coffee, love lifting weights. All of these things are things where I just get present to the truth of the moment, and that it just brings me huge joy. But yeah, basically people and learning and exercise and challenge, love walking in the forest, all of that.
Wonderful. Well, thank you so much for being on the podcast today and for all your wisdom.
Oh, thank you so much for inviting me. It's a real pleasure and really nice to meet you, Kimberly.
Yeah, so I have one last question before we complete. What is your best advice on living an incredible, amazing life?
I'll give a couple of answers. Quick three-step process advice. My assertion is that the two most valuable things anyone can discover are how their experience is created and who they really are. So how your experience is created, you're living in the experience of an internally generated perceptual reality, 100% of the time, no exceptions. And you see that, that's a game changer. Who you really are. There's a guy called Teilhard de Chardin who I like to paraphrase. My paraphrase is this: we're not human beings having a spiritual experience. We're one spiritual being having 8 billion human experiences. And who you really are is that one spiritual being. Who you really are is consciousness itself. And you wake up to the truth of that, to your true identity, and it's a different kind of life. So for a lot of people listening, they'll go, I don't know what this bloke's on about, but that's not for me. But for some people listening, they'll be like, he's on to something. So step one, if you think decide whether or not you think I'm on to something. If you think I'm on to something rather than on something, then step two is decide whether life would be sweeter if you knew the stuff that I'm pointing to, if you knew that you have this source of clarity, happiness, joy, well-being, mental health, already with resilience already within you, if you knew that, would your life be sweeter? The answer to that is yes. Then step 3 is make it a priority to learn about this, whether it's by reading my books or exploring the work of Sydney Banks or just diving into this domain. If you think I'm onto something, dive into it, because what I see again and again and again and again is as people start to explore this understanding, kind of the truth of who you really are, life gets way, way better.
That's a great way to end. Thank you so much, Jamie.
You are so welcome. Thanks again for inviting me, Kimberly. It's been a huge pleasure.
We'll talk to you again soon.